Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. We're going to do a live modding video here today. I'm pretty excited about this. So here's the Anbernic RG35XXSP. I made a couple of videos about this before, but one of the things I don't like about it is that the buttons are a little bit too loud and clicky. Now I've heard on Reddit and like on Discord and whatnot that you can actually make these quieter by adding a couple layers of tape onto the actual PCB on the dome switch. So that's what we're going to try out here today. We're going to try a couple other things while I have it open as well to see if I can improve, for example, the rattling that we have here. So I don't know how this is going to go. We're going to do it live. I obviously will edit this a bunch to put it together, make it more watchable, but I'm just going to do this all in one sitting and see how it goes. Now, a couple other notes here is that I also have my Game Boy Advance SP. This is an aftermarket model, so not completely true to the original, but it has a much quieter sound with the buttons. So we're going to use this as a reference model as well. The idea here is that I have two of these. I've got my silver one and then I have the transparent blue as well. I'm not going to touch the blue one at all. So this is going to be like our standard reference point when it comes to the Anbernic. And then I have this one, which I'm going to try to improve, and we'll see what the difference is between the two. Not only am I trying to improve the quietness of the buttons, but I also want them to be a little bit easier to press down on. So we're also going to test like the actuation force later in this video as well. Now, in terms of equipment, I don't have a ton of stuff, so let me kind of walk through this really quickly. I plan on using masking tape. Now, I also have electrical tape, so I could use that as well, but I think that electrical tape can get gooey over time, and so I want to avoid this. We're going to try masking tape to see how that works. I'll play it by ear once we get inside. I also have a pair of scissors just to be able to cut the tape into smaller squares, and then I have my toolkit. This is from iFixit. I think it's called like the Tech Toolkit or something. And I've had it for years. I got it as a Father's Day present. I love this thing. A couple things that are going to be important here are going to be the screwdriver sets. This has a precision screwdriver. We're probably going to need like a 000 or a 00, which is going to be a small Phillips head screwdriver. And then also we're going to need a T6 Torx screw. So let me see if I can get this in the camera. Yeah, it's not showing up super well, but this is a T6 Torx screw. These are usually used in Anbernic devices in order to open up the shell. So I assume I'm going to need this. I can't remember. I've already torn this thing down once, but I think this is the screw head that I'm going to need. Anyway, we're going to use those parts and then also probably some tweezers. So this comes with some tweezers, which would be super handy. So if you need to grab something like the tape, for example, and place it precisely, I'm going to use that. Then finally, I have a little scale. This is just a kitchen scale. So I'm going to use this to test the actuation force. This is not a very scientific measurement, but essentially I'll put the device on here and then I'll press on the button and see how long it takes in terms of the pressure in order for the button to actually click. And so I'm hoping that we'll reduce the actuation force. I think it was around 150 grams when I did my impressions video. I will check and reference that, but yeah, I think that's what it was. So let's go ahead and get started. And right off the bat, I can already see that, yeah, there's a Phillips head screw right here for the battery compartment. And I think the board itself uses Phillips screws. And then we also have the T6 screw right here in the shell itself. So I'm going to take the battery out first, and then we'll do the T6 screws. And this screw actually just stays in place. So once you have it unscrewed, you can just pull the whole compartment out. Now let's pop out the battery, and then I'm just going to unplug it here just to make sure that it's not going to conflict with anything. It's not like a big deal in terms of like an electrical short or whatever, but it's always good to have this out when you are making any sort of repairs. Now let's do the T6 screws. Okay, so all those screws came out, no problem whatsoever, and this is pretty easy to take apart if I remember. Yeah, so you can just pull the back plate off, and then you have all of your shoulder and trigger buttons. Now these are pretty cool. They have like a little plastic piece right there, and so you actually slide these into a hole to put them into place. So you can see here with the shoulders and triggers, there's like a little hole right there. You got the piece of plastic, so you can just slide it in like that. They're all labeled as well, so you don't have to worry about losing them or anything else like that. So super simple mechanism. I actually think this is probably one of the better like devices from Anbernic in terms of repairability, because it's pretty easy to take this apart. Now on the sides, you will have your volume buttons and then also your power and reset. And these are kind of held together by a little piece of plastic. This is very typical for Anbernic. So we're going to set those to the side as well. And really after that, all we have to do is just take off these 3 screws right here to remove the board. I'm also going to take the SD cards out just to make sure they don't get broken. Now, when removing the board, I would recommend being a little bit careful because we have that little ribbon right here. You can see it here. So just make sure that you kind of pull it open, then flip this part up. Oh, I dropped a bunch of buttons. But yeah, just flip that up, make sure that you don't have anything stuck right there. Then you can pull the board off. Now, the board actually has these little rubber membrane connections. You can see that we have each of them here for both the D-pad as well as the face button. So you can remove those. Just remember that when you do place them down, you want to make sure that they're facing up like this. And then on this side, you can see all the buttons fell out, but these are just going to pull into place. They each have a little piece of plastic around them, so it's really easy to know which one goes where. So really, when it comes down to it, we don't have to mess with this part of the shell at all. We're just going to be doing all the changes to the board itself. So I'm going to put this to the side. Now, when it comes to putting tape on the actual board itself, there's a bit of a consensus around the community in terms of how many layers you're supposed to put to get the best experience. So right now, everyone is saying that you should probably put 2 layers on the D-pad, 3 layers each on the face buttons, and then 1 layer on the select and start if you would like, and then 2 layers on the menu buttons. So that's kind of the consensus. But you also have to bear in mind that people have been using various thicknesses when it comes to tape, and so it's not super consistent, at least right now. After all, masking tape and electrical tape are a little bit thinner and thicker compared to one another. So it's not a perfect solution, but at least what we're working with here, we're going to try to stick with the community guidelines. Now, I've also heard that some people are putting tape on the micro switches here for these shoulders and triggers. So we might test that out as well. That's kind of interesting. I think it'll make it rattle a little bit less, and that would be awesome. And so let's go ahead and start. We'll do the face buttons first. These are the ones that are supposed to be 3 layers each. So I'm going to take this masking tape. I'm going to cut it into as many little squares as I can. Then I'm going to put 12 little squares here on these 4 buttons, 3 each. Now for the masking tape, I'm just going to use some Scotch 3M, just typical masking tape here. What I'm going to do is probably use like half of this distance, or this width right here is going to be enough for one of these squares. So I'm going to do everything in 2s. I think that's going to make the most sense. So here I have just a piece, and I'm going to cut it in half. And then I'm hoping this little square will be about the right size. Yeah, it's about the right size. There's a little bit of overlap, but I think it's going to be fine. Okay, so 1 layer down. We'll do a second layer. 2 layers down. Okay, so there's 2 layers on the face button. Let me do a couple more here. And to be fair, I'm not trying to be like super precise here. I'm just trying to see, just from a regular standpoint, just a regular guy trying to make his device better. Like, I'm not trying to, get this down to the exact millimeter. Instead, I just want to make sure this is going to work for everybody. And so I'm a little bit lazy in this kind of approach, but I'm trying to be like to everybody else, like I'm not trying to be super precise. And honestly, I don't like working with little things like this with my fingers. It bothers me. And so I always like to get this done as soon as possible anyway. Anyway, we're halfway done now with the face buttons. I've put 3 layers on each, and it's still very easy to press these down. So I'm thinking that, yeah, this might actually work pretty well. Okay, so there we are. We've got 3 layers each on each of these face buttons. And yeah, I think you can see there's a little bit of thickness there. It's still pretty easy to press down on these buttons, so I'm hoping this will really improve the process. Now let's go ahead and do the D-pad. We're going to do 2 layers each on these. Now, one thing I want to point out while I'm doing this is that it is super awesome that there are a bunch of people who are willing to make all of these tests and come up with a consensus in the community about how to make this the best device possible. These are some of the things that I always hope I can get to when I make my own review, but I got to admit, it's pretty hard to come up with all this stuff on your own. And so I love the idea of a community coming together and figuring out solutions, because I'm only one of many people. And so this is super cool that there was already a solution in place before I even started rolling with this video. So, okay, we've got now 2 layers on the D-pad and then 3 on the face button. These are all still pretty easy to press down on. So now I'm going to do 1 layer each on select and start, 2 layers up here. The nice thing about these micro switches is they're pretty elevated from the board already. And so I'm not too worried about having overlap here of extra tape on each side. Because these things are so high up off the board, I think it'll actually work out pretty well. So I'm just going to put like standard square sizes like these ones just directly here, and I think that'll be okay. I will say that these ones in particular are a lot harder to press down on with the tape on them. And so I'm not fully convinced these are going to be perfect. We may end up taking these off afterwards, but we will test it out as is just to make sure everything's good. Now, as far as these shoulders and triggers, I don't want to put the tape directly on the micro switches. I think I'm going to put them on the buttons instead, like a little bit of padding right here. That should hopefully reduce the wobble on them. So that means we can actually put this PCB together right now, because these can be put on later. So let's actually do that. Now, when putting the ribbon cable in, you got to be a little bit careful. I like to hold it here so it's a little bit firm, and then just put it into place. You can see exactly where it's going to line up. It doesn't go in very far. Once you have it lined up, just pull the latch down, and then you've got it secured into place. Now we're ready to put this together. I did take the D-pad and the face buttons out, so I need to put those back in. and then we can put on the actual rubber membranes, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, so once we have those in, then we want to put in these rubber membranes. Now this part that has the little holes in it, like this part of it, this is going to push down into the little parts of the D-pad and the buttons as well. So that's what's going to kind of latch it into place. So you want to make sure this part goes down. Okay, so I think we have everything now connected. So let's go ahead and close it. And now we can actually put the screws into place. We can put the PCB there, and then we'll add these buttons, and this is when we'll determine whether or not we can actually dampen them down. And when you're screwing together electronics, it's always important to make them snug but not tight. The thing is that most of these screws are going into plastic, so if you screw them down too much, you can really damage things. And so I always just go until the point where I have a little bit of resistance, and then a little bit more, and then we're done. Okay, so now let's try to figure out these buttons. So, the way these work is we can put these shoulder buttons here, and then we have our trigger buttons on this part. So the idea is that we can put something here to make them wobble a little bit less. And like I mentioned, I think I'm going to put it directly on the buttons instead. And just to be consistent, I'm going to use the same size squares that we were doing before and see how this works. And the idea is we're supposed to put 2 layers here every time we do this. So the biggest thing is I don't want to have any sticking outside of the button. That might cause, friction or whatever everywhere else. So I'm just going to do like that much right there. So it's still within the button, if that makes any sense. Like there's nothing outside of it to get caught on anything. But yeah, we've got that covered right there. And so let's do 2 layers here. Okay, now these are a little bit more narrow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut along the edge here just to get a little of that tape off. I don't think I can really do it. These are not very precise scissors. There we go. So I've just cut off the edges there to make sure that everything is connected correctly. There's no overlap there. I think this is going to work. Okay, so let's try this out. Okay, it's definitely still wobbling, but it's not as much, and it doesn't have like a rattle sound to it when we wobble. It's a little bit dampened. The buttons themselves, super easy to press down on. I think that's going to work. So let's just do 2 pieces of tape on the other ones, and I think we're going to be done with this mod. Okay, next we'll do the volume up and down. Make sure that the plus side is showing up. There's a little extra piece of plastic on that side too, so it holds it in place. And then same thing with the power and reset buttons. Okay, we are now good. So let's go ahead and close this up. Now we're going to use our torque screw to put everything back into place. Then we'll add the battery compartment and we'll be good to go. Okay, next we're going to put the battery in. It takes a little bit of time. You got to kind of coax it in there, but once you push it in, it's good to go. We'll put that back in. We'll put the compartment back on, again with that Phillips screw head. Now I'm going to clean up a little bit, and then it's time for the big reveal. So super excited about this. We'll see how this goes. Okay, so it's still clicky. Okay, it's definitely still clicky, but it's not as bad, especially the D-pad. This is a lot better. I don't know if this is just, a placebo thing, but all the buttons are easy to press down. That's the most important part. In terms of rattle, still rattle. I'm going to put this by the mic. So that's still there. Let's do a one without the tape. So I almost feel like I could have done 3 layers of tape because this is better, but it's still a little bit rattly. This is to the point where it's no longer a negative for me. It was kind of a negative the way it was like rattly and cheap feeling. Now I'm not really feeling that. It's actually good enough for me. And so no problems there. I think that in terms of the rattling of the shoulders and trigger buttons and just the overall volume of them, I think this is okay. It's still a little bit clicky. It's not going to solve everything overnight, but it's definitely better. Yeah, I definitely think this is way more rattly than this one. It's probably like a 30% reduction in rattliness, if that makes any sense. Okay, now I want to test out the sound difference between the two when it comes to the D-pad and the face buttons in particular. And so we'll just do another audio test here. I'm going to switch between the two as we go through. And just for clarification, this is like, maybe 12 inches away from the microphone in an untreated room. Okay, so I would say it's like a 50% reduction in the overall sound. It's not quite at the point of a Game Boy Advance SP, but it is a lot closer. And so this is to the point where it's no longer a complaint for me. It is loud and clicky, but it's not to the point where I would actually put this in the negative column anymore. Now with the previous one, it was definitely a negative for me. I think it was too loud. Like even when I was playing it on an airplane last week when I was on travel, I felt like it was just too loud even then. And an airplane has like a higher ambient noise to it, but even then I was a little bit self-conscious while playing this. This doesn't have that feeling to me. It's a little bit clicky. It's definitely not something in the dead of night you'd want to play in bed still, at least next to like a sleeping spouse, but it's a lot better. Let's do another test again with the D-pad this time. Yeah, again, this is way better. Like, it's not at the Nintendo level of the Game Boy Advance SP, but it is so close and so much better. And so I'm really happy with this mod so far. Let's do the select and start menu buttons just to make sure. But overall, yeah, already, I think this is totally worth it. I mean, it took me, I don't know, 30 minutes to do all of that taping and modding and stuff. But of course I was recording at the same time, so I'm like getting footage and whatnot. I think for just a regular person, it's going to be a 10-15 minute thing, if that. Anyway, let's do the start and select next. So yeah, these are definitely loud still, but not as bad as it was in the original, and still a big improvement overall. I think I probably would have done 2 layers on the select and start buttons myself, just because I think they could be a little bit quieter. They're not bad, and honestly, how often are you going to be pressing the select and start buttons when you're doing your retro gaming? You know, you're going to pause, use hotkeys, but it's not going to be something that you mash on all the time, depending on the game, obviously. And so I think this is a pretty good setup here. I'm overall really happy with this in terms of just the feel of the buttons and the touch here and the overall noise. It's a little bit less rattly now, and it really just took me like, what, maybe an inch of masking tape to actually set all this stuff up. Now I have 2 more tests I want to do. The first is going to be the actuation force. So I'm going to put this on my little food scale, and I'm going to press down on it and see if there's a difference between the two. After that, we will do actually turning it on and testing it. I want to retry the Contra and Street Fighter test just to see if there's been any difference between the two as well. Okay, we will start with the untouched version first. Now the idea here is I'm going to press on the button, and then once I feel the click, I'm going to check the number. And it's not going to show the number exactly because I'm going to push a little bit too far every time. It's just how you press the button, but it'll give me an idea of about whenabouts it's going to be. So let me try it a few times. So I'm feeling it around 120 grams. That's where I'm feeling, at least with the A button right here. I've heard that other buttons might give you a different feel, but overall, yeah, about 120 grams, and that's about right when I press down on it. Yeah, so I would say 120 grams of actuation force is probably the closest, at least for me, in the consistent way that I'm pressing on this button. Now let's do it with the other one. An interesting note here is that when I put the device back on here on the scale that had been zeroed out for the other one, it still showed 0 grams. That means that even if we did add the tape and stuff, it's going to add less than a gram of weight altogether. Now, in terms of the actuation force, I think it's actually a little bit harder, if not the same, to press down on. I know a lot of people said it was going to be easier to press down on. I'm not really feeling that. It still takes the same amount of force to press down. I'm getting it around 115, 120. So very, very similar to the other one. Okay, after a bunch more testing, it's a little bit lighter. Like 115 grams is what I'm going to go with here. So like 5 grams less. This is such a small difference between the two. So it's not anything that is going to like make me change my perception of the weight of these buttons themselves. I think it still takes about the same amount of force. It just feels a lot better with the tape on it. It's quieter, it's more satisfying to press down on, but I think the amount of force that you actually use to press on the button is about the same. Okay, now let's try the D-pad. I've heard that there might be slight differences between the D-pad force as well. Again, this feels pretty hard to press down on. I would say it's around 130 grams altogether, so a little bit higher than the other. It's really hard. This is not a scientific measurement at all. But yeah, this one does feel harder to press down on. It's a very minute thing. We're not talking about like, some sort of big disruptive change here. We're really just talking about the idea that it's a lot quieter, which is really important. But it still takes quite a bit of force to press down on. It's not like the Game Boy itself where it's like super easy and light to the touch. That hasn't changed. I still think that this is a little bit harder to press down on. It's not the same, like when I'm pushing these two, it's not the same experience, but it's a lot better on this than it was on the blue one. And so I can feel between the two just the overall softness of pressing down, if that makes any sense, but it still requires a little bit of strength to press it down. I don't think it's going to be as fatiguing because of that soft little squishiness to it. It's really hard to go by feel with this stuff, but yeah, I would much rather press on these buttons. I feel like I can press these more quickly because it's just kind of squishing and bouncing, whereas this is very tactile. Now let's actually turn them on and test out like the Contra and Street Fighter test with this one. Okay, we're going to start with the Contra test. I remember in my previous testing that it kind of failed the Contra test in the fact that when you wiggled it back and forth, it didn't move the character around. But that's not a bad thing when it comes to something that's clicky. It just means that it's more precise. And so you're not getting accidental diagonals on a clicky D-pad. Instead, it's just a matter of how fatiguing it's going to be. So here, let's test it again. And so same thing, I'm going to press it down, rock it left and right. Yeah, same thing. It's not moving at all, but that's okay. Like, again, it's a clicky D-pad. And so I don't really mind that. If I go all the way, like I really push it while pressing down, then I can move it. But the most important thing is whether or not you can press a diagonal when you want to, and that you don't when you don't want to. And in that regard, it's perfect. I can go any diagonal direction that I want to, no problem whatsoever. And then same thing, like I'm doing exactly what I want my character to do. If I want him to crouch without moving left or right, it exactly happens when I press down on it. And so this is an excellent D-pad when it comes to precision platformers like this. I played a bunch of Super Mario World in my last trip when I went to New York City, and it was amazing. The fact that I could just jump right on a platform, even on the very edge of it, and I would land exactly where I wanted to. And so this is still the same experience here. It's just smoother now. And so I think it's an improved experience with this tape on it. Now I want to test Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. We're going to do some Hadoukens and Shoryukens, and just make sure that the diagonals are going to work as intended as well. Yeah, it feels great. Same thing as before. Like it's just very precise. So it takes a little bit of time to adjust to just in terms of like the overall feel of it. But again, if you just figure out, how to use a clicky D-pad with fighting games, no problem whatsoever. So yeah, I think overall this controls really well. And again, it's smoother now because we have that tape there. So it's got a little bit of a softer touch to it. It's quieter as well. So altogether, this is a great mod. I got no issues whatsoever. It's still not something I'm super used to because I've learned how to play Street Fighter, both at the arcade, but then also with a Super Nintendo gamepad. And so it's weird for me to use a clicky D-pad like this. But yeah, I feel like it is definitely still doable. I know there are people who prefer to play their fighting games with a clicky, precise D-pad like this. It's great. So no problems whatsoever. My only main issue is going to be obviously just whether or not I can adjust to the D-pad style here, and that it is clicky. So really, I think that's about it for this video. I am super happy with this mod. I think that it worked out really well. It's super inexpensive. You think about it, it just requires some masking tape, some scissors, and then 2 different screwdrivers. You're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver just to get the board off, and then you'll need a T6 Torx screwdriver in order to get inside. Other than that, you don't really need anything else. I didn't even use tweezers or anything. I just cut it down to size, put it on there. This is going to take you maybe 20 minutes to put this all together, and it's going to improve this device significantly. Now, one of my major issues with this device was that it was so rattly and that the buttons were too hard and too loud. And this fixes most of them. It doesn't make them perfect. It's not a perfect device. It still has a little bit of rattle to it. The buttons are still a little bit hard to press down on, and they are a little bit loud. But it's all to the point where it actually takes it away from being a negative for me. It's almost like a charming little part of the device now. So absolutely worth doing this mod. I would recommend doing it. If anyone comes out with any sort of solutions that makes this easier, for example, somebody on Etsy comes out with these stickers that you can just specially place on there, I think that would be amazing. I will add those in the video description if anyone comes out with those, and I'll put them, linked down below. The only major change I would do here is that I only put 1 layer of tape on the select and start buttons. I think that 2 would have been perfect. So that's the only change I would have made here. I would have maybe tried also 3 layers on the shoulders and triggers to see if it could get a little bit more sturdy, but this is still really good. So in summary, we're talking about 2 layers on select and start, 2 layers on the menu button, 3 layers on the face button, and then 2 on the D-pad buttons. And that's really about it. We can do 2 or 3 on the shoulders and triggers as well. And I do recommend that you put them directly on the buttons and not on the micro switches when it comes to those two. Otherwise, yeah, super simple mod. This was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed this. I like the whole idea of a live mod where I recorded everything in one take, and so it allows you to see the process, and then I can talk to you at the same time. This is going to be a lot of fun to put together in terms of editing as well. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.